Hey, folks, good evening, and thanks for joining me on Phantoms and Monsters Radio. I welcome all new listeners and members to the channel, as well as first timers in the chat. Now, tonight's subject is giants, not normally something I talk a lot about. This subject, this is going to be something for us to ponder as to what these beings really are. Are they merely myths? Or are they maybe legends based on some fact? Now, there is a historical documentation of giants living in America. The journal of Captain John Smith describes a 1608 incident when he and his crew encountered 60 8-foot-tall giants of the Susquehannock tribe while traveling up the tributaries on Chesapeake Bay. So he recorded the following. 60 of those Susquehannock came to us. Such great and well-proportioned men are seldom seen, for they seemed like giants to the English. These are the strangest people of all those countries, both in language and attire, for their language it may well beseem their proportions, sounding from them like a voice in a vault. Their attire is skins of bears and wolves. Some have cassocks made of bear heads and skins. The half sleeves coming to the elbow where the heads of bears and the arms through the open mouth. One had the head of a wolf hanging from a chain for a jewel, with a club suitable to his greatness, sufficient to beat out one's brains. 5 of their chiefs came aboard the ship. The greatest of them had long hair on one side of the head, and the other shorn, closed with the ridge over his crown like a rooster's comb. The calf of the leg was 3/4 of a yard around, and all the rest of his limbs so answerable to that proportion that he seemed the goodliest man we ever beheld. And that's from the Voyages of Captain John Smith. I think just before he went to Jamestown, but I'm not sure. So maybe there are some facts as to these giants' existence. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started and see what we can find out.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So before I get started, I want to mention that the channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. As well, the Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below. So thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you find interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. Again, I want to thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and the channel. Much appreciated. Now, if you're in the chat and you have a question, please use all caps, and I'll try to get to each one of them after the presentation. So first of all, I want to talk a bit about the Peruvian tales of giant hunchbacks. Now, the early conquistadors told tales of battling bands of red-haired hunchback giants, and it caused speculation that a tribe of Stone Age aborigines may inhabit the jungles in northern Peru. Now, these giants were described as olive-skinned, barefooted hunchbacks, more than 6 feet 6 inches tall, with feet twice the normal size. Now, most scientists say that they doubted their existence, but some anthropologists have hinted that it is well within scientific probability. The giants have only been reported in Peru's San Juan province, an area of rainforest and wooded foothills east of the Andes. Its 200,000 residents have no telephone service or paved roads. Now, rumors of giant tribesmen have circulated frequently in the past. They received fresh momentum early when an explorer had said that he stumbled upon the tribe, and I think that was back in the 50s or the 60s. He said that they were clad only in animal skins with reddish hair and spoke a dialect in which he had never heard. He said they fled at his approach. Later, 2 Lima newspapers quoted a local Indian guide as saying a group of 15 giant aborigines armed with thick wooden clubs, stone-headed axes, and hardwood lances attacked a camp of professional hunters. There were also accounts of giant humans who landed on the coast at the point of Santa Elena. The natives, repeating a story received from their forefathers from very remote times, say that they came across the sea on reed rafts that were as large as big ships. Some men were so big that an ordinary man of good size would scarcely reach up to its knees. Their members were in proportion to the size of their bodies, and it was a monstrous thing to see their enormous heads and hair hanging down upon their shoulders. Their eyes were as large as small plates. They say they had no beards and that some of them were clad in the skins of animals and others only in the dress nature gave them. There were no women among them. Now, they lived in continuous hostility with the natives because they slew the latter's women to have them, and they also slew the men for other reasons. But the Indians were not numerous enough to kill these newcomers who occupied their land and lorded it over them. And although they held great discussions about this, they never dared attacking them. So that kind of gives you a context of where maybe some of these stories have been coming from over the years, especially down in Hispanic America, Mesoamerica, as well as South America and Central America. So during the El Salvador Civil War, a group of soldiers were patrolling what they felt, and when they felt the ground start to tremble, soon afterward, a giant man walks by them, ignoring them because of its size. Now, the witness states, the story was told to me by an uncle, and he swears it really happened. He was the only one in the family this happened to, so no one else could back up his story. I don't know if I believe myself. In 1979, there was a 12-year-old long civil war in El Salvador. My uncle was in the military. He was sent to the woods or jungle with 6 other guys to look for military groups that we supposedly camped out there. Now, after walking in the woods for hours, they suddenly felt the ground shake as if something big was coming towards them. He described it like in Jurassic Park when the T-Rex was coming towards them and the water rippled. He said they thought it was the enemy doing something, so they hid. He said that he was shocked when he saw the giant. He said it was walking in the distance. I asked him if it was just maybe a big person like Bigfoot, and he said no. It was more of a Jack and the Beanstalk type giant. He said trees were blocking the view somewhat, but that he can make out that it was a big human. He said it was as tall as the tallest tree there. He said he tried to get a good look at it, but he was terrified and didn't want to get out of hiding when he realized what it was. Now, he said that the giant basically just walked past them. He said they were all terrified and waited for a while as they were scared to bump into one another, or even another giant that may be in the vicinity. He said two of the guys suggested trying to kill it to get rich, but the guy in charge told them to stand down. My uncle said everyone thought they were idiots for suggesting such a thing. Now, he said that they walked back to base as quickly and as quietly as possible. They told everyone when they got back, but no one believed them. They were friends with the pilots, and the pilots said BS to their story because they fly over the jungle all the time, and they had never seen anything like that. He said all the guys described what they saw. One guy claimed it appeared bald. Another guy said he thinks it wore some type of loincloth like Tarzan. Now, my uncle emphasized that he didn't get a good look, and that all he knows is the ground was shaking as if some big creature was coming towards them. He saw what appeared as a giant human walking in the distance. He got down and hid and waited till it was all gone. I began to ask him things like, if it was real, don't you think they would have a body or some bones or something that big? Especially since El Salvador is so tiny compared to other parts of the world. He responded along the lines of, I don't know about none of that stuff. I just know what I saw that day. I don't know how I feel about this personally. This one seems a little bit out there. Now, my mom said maybe it was some sort of spirit that just made itself appear as a giant to scare them. Now, during the Civil War times, my mom claims there were a lot of more paranormal things going on because of all the deaths that were occurring. A lot of innocent people were being killed. My grandma would say if you looked out the window of the house, you would see dead bodies on the street. That wouldn't explain the ground shaking, though. Has anyone ever encountered the story of a Jack of the Beanstalk type of giant? This one scared me as a kid because it's so unbelievable that if it actually happened, it's just that crazy. So a Solomon's Island man recalls a story told to him by a spiritual elder that pertained to the kidnapping of a village girl by a giant, and how he was able to secure her release. He states, I come from a really remote country called the Solomon Islands. I lived there as a child, but I've since moved to Australia. Now, for generations, when I went back, 5 years ago, when I went back, I was talking to our spiritual elder. I believe our ancestors gave him gifts that connect to the spiritual side. And he told me a more recent story. So apparently a family from another village had contacted him about their daughter going missing to see if it was something supernatural. Now, our spiritual man investigated, and he didn't tell me how, and concluded that a giant had taken her. He asked the village if they had a giant population, and they verified that they lived in a cave not too far away. Well, so he goes to investigate the nearby cave. Now, from the outside, it looked like just a completely normal cave, he said, and when it got inside, nothing looked unusual. But before giving up on the lead, he decided to try a blood sacrifice, killing a living thing to use its force, a very common practice among their customs. He did this to see if it would trigger something. He rounded up 3 pigs and slaughtered them in front of the cave, pouring their blood out. He said he waited a bit and decided to go in. Sure enough, when he went in, the cave had changed completely, and there were stairs leading down. My guy went down those stairs deeper into the cave. He said the plants that he saw in the cave were unlike anything he had seen before. He mentioned them glowing in the dark, and it was one of the most beautiful things he had ever seen. He eventually went further and further down, and sure enough, there was a giant on a throne. The giant thanked him for the sacrifice and asked him what he wanted. He mentioned the girl, and the giant knew what he was talking about. He demanded the girl come out, and she appeared. The giant explained that one of his family members had taken a liking to her because she was so beautiful, and he kidnapped her. So my spiritual guy asks for her back, and the giant agrees and lets him take her back. He returns her to the village, and that's just the end of the story. Now, when I was listening to this story, I thought it was pretty wild, but I also know that giants are so prevalent in our stories that maybe there's some truth to what's been said. Now, I don't know what you guys think, but I thought it was an interesting story to share. So I had a very interesting account sent to me back in September 2013. It was sent to me by a reader, actually. He tells me that during, he had an encounter with something that he just couldn't even imagine. He was driving towards Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, northbound on 416 Memorial Highway. It was about 12:20 in the afternoon on a clear sunny day, but it was very windy. He said, when I noticed at first what I thought was a huge seagull about 200 feet in the air ahead of me, within seconds I noticed the wings did not match the initial interpretation I had made, and then saw outstretched arms, a head and torso with legs tucked together in a horizontal orientation. The wings I could see now as I drove towards it nearly 120 kilometers per hour were pure white and very large. Its wings moved up and down rather slowly, each doing a nearly 180-degree movement up and down. One of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. I estimate its full wingspan at 25 to 30 foot. As one of my thoughts during the sighting was that the wings appeared too big for its body. And I wondered how such long wings would be stored when the creature was walking on the ground. So during these observations, my car was steadily heading towards this thing that was also descending, bringing it into extremely clear view. The road turns a few times, changing my initial straight ahead view to an up and to the right line of sight, eventually being directly adjacent to me when it landed about 75 feet from my car. So now that I was looking to my right, I could see it coming down to 3 top levels, still in the horizontal body position, gliding a bit more than flapping its wings like when it was higher. The sun lit up the white feathers, and the wings appeared gray underneath due to the sun and their shadow. The part that still sends chills down my spine was the being's human-like characteristics, yet not being like any human. He was the color of dark, wet clay, face, lips, arms, legs, and all. He was also 12 to 15 feet tall, judging by the height compared to the trees around him. His physical stature would make a 12-foot tall bodybuilder look like a scrawny pipsqueak. The mass and size of its muscles were beast-like and very powerful looking. I remember it looking over and down towards us on the highway, and the look terrified me. It looked at us like we were just ants, but with a certain disdain in its glance. The best look at its face was when he landed. At this point, he dropped his body in a vertical orientation and outstretched his wings to land. Curiously, I could see that in the heavy wind, he was having some trouble. His legs and arms seemed to be used as counterbalance, but the giant wings were catching a lot of wind, making him not completely stable upon final descent, as his limbs were awkwardly jockeying for a balance point as his wings acted as a massive sail. Now, at this time, I could clearly see the inner feathers blowing feverishly in the wind, down-like and soft. While further to the outside of the wing I looked, the longer, stiffer, and more defined feathers became. So stiff, longer feathers around the edges and down-like feathers on the inner part of the wing's underside. I thought in mythological cartoon terms that they were supposed to magically ascend with light and singing and etc., but was not the case here, where it was clearly affected by and had to follow the laws of nature from what I saw. It had no facial hair, but wore some type of headdress, gray in color. It had like braided or dreaded looking locks coming from underneath its hat on either side of its neck, behind the ears, going to the back of its shoulders. I could see around its neck, and it wore some type of robe matching its skin and color, and being thin enough that it could see its muscles right through it. When landing, I could clearly see each of its legs, so it was probably kilt-like on the bottom half of the garment. Now, he did not appear friendly or welcoming. The last seconds I could see him was of his ominous glare towards my direction through my back window as I passed at the moment of touchdown. His nose and upper eye socket ridges cast a black shadow over portions of the clay-colored warrior's looking face. It looked like he was here for a definite reason, and the fact that we were on the road could see him not seem to be bothered at all. At this point, I lost visual contact due to converging tree lines between it and myself, just before looking ahead at the roadside reading exit 66 ahead. Seconds after that, I could see buildings on the south end of Ottawa for the first time. This thing literally landed as close as our nation's capital as it could, while still having fields with trees block it for cover. Now, the being was both the most beautiful and most terrifying thing I've ever seen. It has affected my life in a substantial and eventually positive way. But I live with some regret not having slammed my brakes running to it, even if it had destroyed me. I would at least know more that I could find out, and the fear and shock was gripping, and I was unable to make sense of it or overcome it at the time. My plan was to take exit 66 and backtrack towards it, but I found out the road was about 8+ minutes ahead, at which point I thought the being would be gone by that time. So regrettably, that was the end of my experience. Now, I only took my eyes off of it once when another vehicle in the lane to my right came nearly into my lane as if it was also distracted and veering closely to his lane. We seemed to have both noticed at the same time, corrected our steering, and made a half second of eye contact, both looked back at it in the sky simultaneously at that point. He was driving a late 90s Buick of burgundy color and appeared to be in his late 40s, Middle Eastern, with a buzz haircut. It has taken me years to come forward with what I saw, and I still only share it with a handful of people until now due to the stigma and the rarity of these events that are not easily received by others as, maybe like UFOs and other types of phenomena. I'm not and was not religious, though I do have an ultimate faith, thus was not predisposed to wanting to see anything like this at the time. I did not really think about or believe in angels at all before the encounter, but I can no longer deny their physical existence, only our understanding of them. My goal is to find out on that busy highway that day what I saw as well. Now, before this event, I would have found it very difficult to believe such an account from another person, even if they were close to me. Now, understanding this, I'm uncertain how to best convey the event to you in a way that I would have been receptive to if that's even possible to share fully in words without seeing it for yourself. Now, I did talk to this witness. In fact, I talked to him several times. I believe other people did see this thing. And in fact, there have been some references online for years about what they call the Ottawa Angel. Is it the same creature? I have no idea. Many of the descriptions, even though brief, seem to suggest that what this witness did see actually was there. It was just an apparition. Was it a flesh and blood being? I have no idea what it was. But apparently some people do believe that it does exist. Now, a former deputy sheriff in Pierce County, Washington, reports an encounter that he had while searching for a missing hiker. He claims that he witnessed a nude 12-plus foot tall giant man. He states, in August 1993, I was a deputy sheriff in Pierce County, Washington. I was part of a search for a missing hiker. Now, we had split up into single searchers early in the investigation. I was assigned to an area near Evans Creek Preserve. This area was state land, but adjacent to federal land. It was approximately 2:15 p.m. and the weather was overcast. The woods can become very dark in this area, though I was familiar with the general location. Now, as I conducted my search for the missing hiker, I encountered an unknown entity that was staring at me. It was several hundred feet away, but I could make out that it was human-shaped, but very large and tall. I cautiously approached the individual. As I got closer, it was obvious that this man was nude and that he was of tremendous size. I was within 50 yards or so when he bolted to my right into the dark, deep woods at a speed that was completely impossible for a human being to achieve. I yelled at him to stop, but he continued to run away. My instincts told me that this giant may somehow be involved in the disappearance of the hiker. So by this time, I had drawn my weapon. I was hesitant to call for help or to report what I had witnessed. I was even questioning myself as to what it could have been. Was I hallucinating this giant being? I tried to follow the giant man, but it was simply impossible to do so. So after 15 minutes or so, I got spooked and decided to find my way back to the trail and continue with the search for the hiker. I'll admit, I was fearful of being ambushed by this giant man. Now, this giant man was at least 12 foot in height, very muscular in build, olive skin with no visible hair. He was completely nude. I didn't get close enough to describe facial features, but the head was enormous and oval-shaped. He never made any sounds. It just seems impossible that anything of that size really exists. Now, the hiker was eventually found near Mount Rainier, which was just east of my location. I remained with the department for another 3 years until I moved to Oregon and started working for a security firm. Now, after my encounter with the giant, I was much more wary of the outdoors. I still question what I witnessed that day, but I never told anyone other than my wife and a close friend about the incident. I'm not sure if they believe me. I have never heard of any related sightings here in the Pacific Northwest. This is why I contacted you. Have you ever heard or read of a similar sighting or encounter? Do giants really exist? Thanks for your time. So I contacted a witness and we discussed the sighting. I have no idea what he observed, but he seemed convinced that it was an actual corporeal being. I don't receive many giant sightings, especially in North America. Of course, unless you want to add hairy hominids into that category. So this next account, the witness states, Lon, about 15 years ago, my son, who was about 12, told me a story one day after I picked him up from his after-school friend's house. They lived right by a creek, and the boys always walked down the road to the creek to play in. So one afternoon, about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, when the sun was still high in the sky but starting to descend, it was a little blinding in their eyes. They were walking down the road to the bridge over the creek when they noticed a man standing on the road. Now, this is from the mouth of a 12-year-old. He said this man was just standing there, looked like he was all in black, and said it looked like the man didn't have a neck. They were a little puzzled but kept walking toward it. He said that it was when it opened its arms straight out, it appeared to have wings. Now, at that time, He said it just flapped them one time, like his arms went down one time, and he said it took off straight up into the air. They tried to see where it went, but said the sun was in their eyes. I didn't know what to think at the time, but just dismissed it as young boys and their stories. Now, when I started working nights about 11 years ago, I started listening to Coast AM and realized he had possibly seen a Mothman. Now, when he told me when he was in his early 20s, he was hanging out with some friends from a surrounding small town. They were telling stories, and one of the guys started talking about seeing this giant flying bird man. This is the same area where my son had seen it. They were both excited to meet someone else who had seen what they had. This occurred near Panther Creek on Kern Road in Auburn, Illinois. So, of course, this is an area where we have had some of the humanoid sightings in the Chicagoland area. But because of the size described by this witness, who I later talked to, I don't think this is related to it. Though, then again, it may very well be. I don't know. But I decided to put it in here since the size of it, and so people get context of what it actually was or may have been. Now, this following account was forwarded to me. In the past, I've heard a few bizarre supernatural tales from the Hawaiian Islands, but not this giant encounter. In 1973, a man had gone to the river in Whitmer Village in Hawaii with his friends to catch catfish. They laid traps in the river for about an hour, intending to return in the morning to gather the fish. Now, as they were busy putting in their traps, they heard a blood-curdling scream. It sounded at first like a wild man screaming in the bushes right next to them. In a state of panic, the witnesses began to run. As they got to the top of the hill, running down a little trail, they came to a curve in the path. And as they entered the turn, they all stopped dead in their tracks. An 8-foot-tall man was walking down the trail, heading right for them. He was naked except for the cloth around his waist. They turned and ran back to the river. Now, as he stumbled down the side of the embankment, a giant woman stepped out from behind a tree. She must have been at least 7 feet tall. Turning downriver, they ran until they came out of the ravine safely. Giant footprints were found at the site. Now, unfortunately, I never got a picture of the footsteps, though maybe I will at some point. But even though that was a short story, I thought it was pretty interesting. So this next account, I'm going to be talking about something that people have been talking about ever since the war started in Afghanistan. And it's been going on for 2 decades. People still talk about it, the Kandahar Giant. A U.S. Army patrol supposedly encounters and kills a red-haired 12-foot-plus giant man in remote Kandahar province. Also, special forces hunted down a rogue Bigfoot. But I have received additional information over the years. But I also received this account along with it. Now, the person who sent this to me stated that my brother John, who retired as a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel, told me that when he retired and was working for the VA, a retired service member at the VA confirmed a 15-foot-tall red-haired giant in Afghanistan. The Army tried to conceal this incident but could not, as over 100 people had seen this giant both before it was killed and later brought back to Bagram Air Base. The creature's skin was so thick that the bullets seemed to not be able to penetrate it. They shot at its head and face. That is how they killed it. The first Army troops that encountered it were all killed by the creature with their gear left untouched on the ground. The bones were of some of the soldiers in the first detachment, as some had been devoured. After they killed the giant, the Army sent a helicopter to pick it up and fly it back to base. The pallet used to place the giant on was only about 12 foot long, so it had to be put the body on a pallet in a fetal position for it to fit. They were also concerned about its weight, if it was too heavy to lift and fly away with. Many people and soldiers at the airfield saw it. Now, the Army also found several grave sites which had other giants buried in them from perhaps long ago. One of the skeletons was supposedly sent to the Smithsonian Museum in D.C., where it's stored. My brother also knows about Bigfoot encounters at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and Fort Lewis, Washington. There was also a battle that occurred between a special Army unit from Fort Belvoir, Virginia, that hunted and killed 7 Bigfoot that were killing and devouring people. And I have talked about that incident before as well. And here I have another witness coming forward and talking about it. He also states, I was an officer in the USAF and worked in the intelligence community. I am aware of some UFO incidents not exposed or made public, and about the Black Project program that recovers crashed UFOs. Now, the original account about this giant, this Kandahar giant, is a U.S. Army patrol encounters red-haired, 12-foot plus giant man in remote Kandahar province. A soldier opens fire but is killed by the beast. The giant is eventually killed and transported away by helicopter. In 2002, a U.S. Army patrol had gone missing in a very remote area, Kandahar province, Afghanistan. Another patrol was dispatched on a search and rescue mission. One soldier commented on what they found. Now, as we went around this corner, you could see the opening of the cave. And then I see a lot of rocks, which is another oddity. And then the bone matter. I'm not close enough to identify what kind of bones, but I did see what I knew to be a piece of communication equipment. So instantly we're thinking ambush, maybe animal, could be anything. There was enough room in the front of the cave, but it had a sheer drop-off. But there was enough room that we could get into a decent dispersal in case of an ambush. Not long after they had gotten into the dispersal formation, they saw something emerge from the cave that caught them fully off guard. He states it was a monster. It was a man at least 12 to 15 feet in height. This is a monster. Red beard, his hair was longish past his shoulders, a scarlet red. One of the troops ran at him and started shooting, which broke all of us into the reality because it was surreal. While this soldier is moving at him, another friend of mine is laying down fire, and I started firing. This beast skewers the first soldier with the weapon he had. He now got him on a pike. He went right through him. He's got him, and he's coming after more. We all just clicked in. I don't know what it was. What I remember, we all had, we were all saying, like, shoot her in the face, shoot her in the head. And it took multiple hits and was still moving. Eventually, the giant was killed. A helicopter soon arrived and dropped some cargo netting. A large helicopter came by, dropped the hook, and the giant was carried off. The soldier confirmed that the red-haired, fair-skinned giant had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. After they had submitted their report, the soldier recounts that they were told by the top brass to edit the report in a particular fashion, presumably remove any mention of a giant being. Another special operations soldier in Afghanistan provides the following testimony to the incident, even though he was not a direct witness to it. We would come back to the base to start hearing this rumor about a unit that killed what they started calling a really tall person. At first, I didn't think anything of it, then come to find out the person they killed was 3 times the size of a man and had extra digits on its hands and an extra digit on his feet and had red hair, and a special unit had come in and wanted this target. Well, we heard that they killed this thing inside a cave or the mouth of a cave, and there was common knowledge among the military to hear this. When you first hear it, you're thinking like, this has got to be a joke. This has got to be a hoax. And after things go down a certain way, you keep hearing it and you start to realize that this was not a joke. This pilot had landed at a base in Afghanistan, was told that he had to pick up special cargo and that were there absolutely no cameras allowed. The pilot describes the cargo. It was basically a dead guy, and this guy was extremely large. And when I say large, our pallets are basically, if you remember correctly, about 9 to 12 foot in size or so. And this guy was lying in a fetal position on the pallet, and he filled the pallet. He was around 1,100 pounds, if by my judgment. The pilot corroborated much more of the detail given by the other two witnesses, including the fact that this giant was fair-skinned, red-haired, and had extra digits on its hand and feet. Now, look, there have been a lot of several variations of this account, but I believe, though I hate in a way saying it, that this incident may have actually occurred. I've heard other incident reports of bizarre creatures that were encountered by soldiers in the mountains of Afghanistan. A lot of different weird things that are just unimaginable. So is it true? I don't know, but there you go. So anyway, folks, you got questions. Let's put them out there and let's see what we got. Thomas became a new member. Thank you, Thomas. Let's see what we got here. Sir Wolf. Hi, Lon. What do you know of giant ginger tribes with double rows of teeth warring with indigenous people and being wiped out? I have heard that before. The red-haired giants. That theme seems to be prevalent in a lot of these stories in a lot of different areas, even in the United States. The early sightings down in Peru, the red-haired giants, also down there. I don't know. I don't know what to think about all that, quite honest with you. But it's, I'm not really into the whole giant thing unless I get something from eyewitnesses who, do state that they know someone or they did see something. So, I don't know. That's the best I can answer, quite frankly. Dagnabbit, have skeletons of giants ever been discovered? Well, the evidence and the photos or supposed photos that I have seen, it's questionable. I don't know if they've actually found anything or not. This whole thing about stuff being stored at the Smithsonian DC between Bigfoot and giants and everything else, I don't know how true all that is. Makes for a good story, but who knows? Cryptid Cryptids. Do you think giants are Bigfoot or a Sam? I think there's a possibility there may be confusion in some respects. I've heard stories of huge Bigfoot, especially out in New Mexico and stuff. The furry ones. People report these things being anywhere from 10 to 15 feet sometimes. I don't know what to think, but I under the circumstances, I think people probably could be misidentifying them. B3 Airspace. Why do they whisk away when they find giant skeleton bones? Well, it's just like anything else. I mean, you get the government involved, they don't want it. They don't want a lot of stuff getting out, especially when it pertains to military. If military has seen it, or if the higher brass want to look at it to experiment on it, that's not going to be common knowledge. That's anything. So, yeah, that doesn't really surprise me. Short order cook. Where did the bones of the skeletons go to that were found somewhere in the USA desert? Was the Smithsonian never to be seen again? Well, if it was collected, I don't know anything about it. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories over the years involving military and government taking natural samples or bodies of certain creatures and such, but you really don't know what to believe. You hear, just like Roswell, you hear about the aliens and where they were stored, and things I've heard, a lot of different stories, different places where they could or couldn't be. Until we get some type of actual evidence, it's all speculation at this point. Could it happen? Absolutely. I think it could happen. Jose Sanchez. Would Bigfoot also be considered a giant among those large specimens? Well, as I said, yeah, it very well could be. And, I believe that could be possible. Absolutely. Michael Angel Escalante, do you believe the Bible is accurate when it talks about giants? Well, I'm not a religious person. I don't know how historically valid the Bible is. There may be parts of it that has some historical value to it. If you're talking about the Nephilim and such, where it's mentioned in, Goliath and other things that are mentioned in the Bible, I guess it's possible. But then again, we're left to our own devices to figure these things out. So do you, Michael Angel Escalante, do you believe they built the methylitic sites lifting the giant stones? Well, again, were these things real? Were they used as some type of labor to lift giant stones? You see a lot of areas where huge stones, you got to question how they ever got to where they got, how they were placed there. There's a lot of historical sites, especially around the Eastern Mediterranean, where you see a lot of places that have large stones with massive tonnage that even with equipment that we have nowadays couldn't possibly lift. So who knows? Who knows? Short order cook. It would be good maybe to do an episode on the creature anomalies of the Afghanistan war. Yeah, I've thought about that. I'm going to dig all that out. I've got a lot of different ones from Afghanistan and Iraq. I've got a few accounts as well about possible jinn or something that may have been a jinn, but looked more monstrous than a spiritual being. If you look into the old accounts, the Islamic accounts of jinn and other creatures, you find some really weird stories in there. Yeah, I'll look into it. Maybe I'll have enough for a show. Okay, folks. Well, I want to thank you all for showing up. Thanks each and all of you for watching and chatting. If you donate, it's appreciated. And your support is what makes all this possible. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you have a sighting or encounter report that you'd like to be considered for the show, please feel free to contact me at LonStricklerFamsandMonsters.com. So until we meet again, you all have a great weekend, and next Friday, we will be back, and we'll see what we can come up with. If you have suggestions for the show, we got one from Shorter Cook. You have others, feel free to contact me. and we'll see what we can do about it. So until then, you take care and have a great weekend and have a great week next week. Talk to you later.